I'm Tila with Deep English, and I'm super excited for today's lesson. I think that today's lesson might be the most important lesson I've ever shared with you guys, so it is exciting. So today we are going to be talking about how to have deep and meaningful conversations in English. So I think that this is one of the most challenging parts of speaking a new language. It can be so difficult to have conversations that feel deep and meaningful and allow us to truly connect with the people that we're speaking to. I know that when I was living in Ecuador and I was learning Spanish, it was very easy to ask questions like, "How are you?" or "Where are you from?" It was so much more challenging to have conversations that felt real and that felt like I was really getting to know someone. So I often felt lonely and like no one really knew me and I didn't really know anyone else. All of my conversations felt like they stayed on the surface and they never went deeper. But when I finally figured out how to have deep and meaningful conversations in Spanish, everything changed for me. I didn't feel lonely anymore. I felt like I could truly connect with other people who spoke Spanish. And that's what I want for you. I want you to feel like you can really connect with other English speakers. And so that's why today's lesson is all about having deep and meaningful conversations in English. So I've got 3 things to share with you today. So the first tip for having deep and meaningful conversations in English is to focus on asking the right questions. Asking the right questions. So many people think that to be a great conversationalist, you have to have a lot of interesting things to say. And that's not necessarily true. To be a great conversationalist, you have to know how to ask the right questions. So what are the right questions? Well, open-ended questions instead of yes-no questions are the right questions. So, a yes-no question is a question that can be answered with a simple yes or no. So this is a question like, were you afraid? If you ask me, were you afraid? I'll probably say, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. And you won't learn any more about me than that. But if instead of asking me a yes-no question, you ask me an open-ended question, then you'll probably learn more. So instead of saying, were you afraid? You could ask, how were you feeling? If you ask me, how were you feeling? You're probably going to learn a lot more about me, about how I was feeling, and you'll also feel like we're connecting on a deeper level. So other examples of open-ended questions are, why were you so stressed? Or, how did you feel when that happened? Or, what do you think you'll do about that in the future? So any question that requires more than a yes or no answer. This is an open-ended question and it's really great for learning more about someone else and making your conversations deeper and more meaningful. The other type of question that is a really good kind of question to ask is a question that leads us into imaginary scenarios. And for this part of our lesson, I'm actually going to invite my fiance James in to help me explain how to ask these kinds of questions. Okay, everyone, now we have James here, my very awesome and very handsome fiance.
Hello.
So he's going to help us learn more about how imaginary situations can lead us into deeper conversations in English. And so we're going to learn how to ask questions that lead us into these imaginary situations. So for example, I could ask James a question like, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go?
That's a very good question. I would go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia.
Interesting. Why would you go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia?
Well, I really love learning about history and our ancient past and kind of understanding where we came from. I love sacred spaces. I love mysteries. And Anchor Watt, to me, has all those things together. So I'd be really excited to check it out.
Okay, amazing. So I just learned so much about James. So do you see what happened there? I asked him a question about an imaginary situation. I said, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? So he answered Cambodia. And then I said, why? And when I asked him why, it allowed me to learn so much more about him. And in such a short amount of time, I learned what he's excited about, what really gets him going. And so this is the thing that helps us to have deeper and more meaningful conversations in English. So just asking these kinds of questions can be so helpful. So let's do another one. James, ask me a question.
Tila, what would you do if you had $1 million?
I think if I had $1 million, I would start a company to help people heal from their trauma.
Wow. Why is that?
Well, because I think that so many people have experienced something traumatic. And if we can heal from that, we'll be able to have lives that are more joyful and we'll all feel so much more alive. So I think it's really important. Okay, so with this question, James just learned a ton about me. And the cool thing was that I got to really think about, that's a good question. It allowed me to go inside of my own mind in a space that I wouldn't usually go in a conversation, and I was able to share from that place. But the other cool thing is that when we talk about imaginary situations, it's a very safe conversation. I'm not asking James to share personal information with me. He's not asking me to share all of my deep, dark secrets. We are simply talking about these imaginary situations, and that's actually a lot of fun, but also lets us learn so much about each other. So, if you guys would like to, I encourage you to answer below, what would you do if you had $1 million? So what would you do if you had $1 million? Maybe comment below. And then, after you've commented, look at what other people have said and ask them why. Why would they do that if they had $1 million? And this is a really great way to get to know other people on a deeper level, and it's really quick as well. Okay, that does it. Thank you, James, so much for helping out with this part of the lesson.
Welcome. Nice to meet you guys.
So now that we know how to ask the right questions, and we've had the help of my awesome fiance, James, we're going to learn the second thing that you can do to have deep and meaningful conversations in English. So the second thing you can do is to become a better listener. So many people are terrible listeners. People don't know how to listen well, and people often don't like to listen. So why is that? Well, for one, people would rather be in control, and it's easier to be in control if you are the one talking. But number two, the thing about listening is that the brain can actually process 500 words a minute. However, we can only talk at a speed of 250 words a minute. That means that for many of us, we get bored when we're listening. And if we're bored, we start to think about all of these other things, and then we're not a great listener. So if you're listening to someone in English, you may not be bored, but you might be confused. You might be thinking about what you want to say in response to what they're saying. And all of those things will contribute to you being a terrible listener. So the Buddha said something like, if you are talking, you're not learning. And I think that this is so true. So we can close our mouths and be really intentional about our listening. Being really intentional. Instead of listening just so that we can respond, we're listening to learn more about the other person, to simply learn more about what it means to be here as a human being. So listening with the intent of learning and being present. So no more than that can help you to become a great conversationalist in English and someone who is able to have deep and meaningful conversations in English. All right, The third way that you can have deep and meaningful conversations in English is by talking more about your emotions. So this one is often scary for people, and I understand why. Sometimes it's hard to talk about our feelings because it's very vulnerable, and a lot of people don't like to share that inside part of who they are. But the good news is I'm not asking you to share your deep, dark secrets. No, nothing like that. People need to earn access to those deeper parts of you. But I am asking for you to share just simply how you're feeling or how you felt. Because when you're speaking with someone and you include your emotional reality, like how you're feeling in the conversation, the person who's listening can actually begin to feel the way that you were feeling as well. So they can live vicariously through what you're saying. So for example, if you say something like, yeah, I was hiking a mountain and I got to the top. Okay, your listener can imagine you at the top of a mountain. But if you say something like, I was hiking a mountain and when I got to the top, I was completely overjoyed. This allows your listener to also feel the feelings of being overjoyed, and it's easier then to connect with you, to know more about who you are, what makes you happy, and this is an opportunity to bond. So the more that we can share how we feel with the people that we're talking to, the easier it is for them to feel like they're really connecting to us and for them to kind of have an experience of us that's more than just, imagining where we were or what we were doing. They can actually experience how we were feeling. So another tip in this is instead of using the most basic words to describe your emotions, like, oh, I felt happy, or I felt sad, or I felt mad, we can begin to learn more vocabulary words to talk about our emotions. So the more words that you have to talk about your emotions, the more specific you can be about your feelings, and the more you'll be able to share who you really are with other people. So for example, you could say something like, I was happy when I won the award. Okay, the other person can understand you were happy. But if you say something like, I was absolutely ecstatic when I won the award, they can imagine that you were so happy that you were like overjoyed, you were ecstatic. So this gives a more specific idea of what you were going through and allows the other person to understand at a deeper level what you were going through. And that's a huge part about having conversations that are more deep and meaningful. So allowing the other person to truly understand who you are and what you've been through. So another example of this is instead of saying, I was so afraid when I saw that the storm was approaching, you could say, I was absolutely terrified. Again, when you use words that are more specific, you give the listener a more specific experience of who you are and the way that you felt in the moment. And you also allow your listener to experience that emotion as well. And the more that you can connect on an emotional level with another human being, the closer you will feel to them, the more easy it will be for them to remember you in the future. So it's more likely that you'll become friends. So all of these things are so important. Okay, I absolutely love this lesson. I think it's one of the most important lessons because as we learn to have deeper and more meaningful conversations in English, it's so much easier to connect with other human beings, and that's why we're all here. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. As always, it was an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this class, feel free to comment below, to give us a like, to subscribe to our channel, and you can also click below to get access to some free English courses. Thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.